Hi, my name is Trever Shirin, and I am the Director of Content here at Mayfield Counseling Centers. I'm also a therapist, and I love working with clients to identify their skills, and that's one of the things that I want to do with you today. I want to use an activity that's called the coping grid. Pretty simple, but it's really helpful in allowing us to see our coping skills in a different perspective than maybe we normally do. One other benefit to this activity is that we can list out all of these coping ideas, these strategies that we know we have or ones that we've thought maybe we could try. And then in the moment of distress, whether that's anxiety or sadness or even like events like a breakup or getting fired from work or just feeling really disappointed that something's not happening. We know that there's this list that we've created of all of the coping strategies that we could think of, that we could recognize in ourselves, that we can choose from. Now, I want to be really clear with this. One of the benefits of the coping grid is doing this with someone else. And so I want to encourage you, whether this is with your therapist or a close friend or a family member, invite them into the process after you've done a little bit of exploration on your own. It's really valuable because you will probably find yourself in a place where you run out of ideas. And when I work on the coping grid with my clients, typically that's the point where I let them think a little bit more, think. And when it really doesn't feel like there's anything they're able to come up with, I offer something like, what about music? Or, hey, I've heard you talk about this. So that's why I would say it's valuable to bring somebody else into this process as well. All right, let's go through the concept of this coping grid. So here's what you need. Just a piece of paper, and you're gonna write 2 lines, one vertical and one horizontal. On the top of your sheet, you're gonna put active and passive. Now, I wanna be really clear with these words. This does not mean that all of the things in the active column are activities that are active. So like climbing, running, exercising, like those are all active, but that's not what we're talking about. Active is really talking about, are we leaning in to our feelings or are we passive, leaning out of our feelings? And so with this, something like journaling might be really, really active because you're leaning into the feelings, especially if you're journaling something like, I'm struggling with feelings of doubt about whether or not I'm where I'm supposed to be in life. That is very active work because you're leaning in to that feeling. Passive is leaning away. So this might be distracting yourself or even just focusing in on something different. Passive often gets a bad rap. A lot of the times it feels like we should only be coping actively, but that's not true. We need to have passive coping. Otherwise, we just can't handle to sit in active coping all the time. Sometimes we need something like a TV show that we can just kind of veg with for a little bit. Now is the point in the conversation where I want to talk about the row. So we've got active, passive, but then we've got positive and negative. If we talk about something like watching TV as a passive skill, I want to be really clear that that can be positive, but also there is a difference between the positive and the negative, where if you're watching one episode of The Office because it helps you kind of relax, unwind, that's wonderful. But if you find yourself binging an entire 4 seasons of The Office, now we've probably come into negative. Because what negative and positive are talking about is, does this lead into who you want to be, what you want to be doing with your life? Or does this take away from that or make it harder to function in your life? With something like The Office, one episode of The Office might really help you unwind after a long day and then feel ready to go talk to somebody or do some of the more active coping. It may also just give you some space where that thing that felt really distressing before no longer feels as distressing. If you're watching 4 seasons of The Office, I think that's something like 120 something hours. And so it means you've been doing this for at least a week straight and not doing anything else. You may have let go of school or work or relationships or hygiene even. And so this is something that's taking away from your ability to function. It's getting in the way of what you want to do. Other examples of negative coping might be substance use or self-harm or outbursts of anger, punching walls, things like that. You may be asking, why are we focusing on the negative coping strategies? I thought this was supposed to help me. You're right. And I think it's really valuable for us to be able to see what our negative coping strategies are, to also give them some credit because they're doing something for us. There's a reason that we're using them because they help, even if they hurt us in the meantime. For example, if I know that my feelings are super overwhelming, but if I self-harm, I'm gonna feel less overwhelmed, there's a really clear use of that coping skill. I may also be able to tell by putting it on this grid that that is now a passive negative skill. And so what I might be able to start thinking about is if that is a really strong go-to passive negative coping skill, how can I find an equally impactful positive passive skill? Because we want to keep the passive, because I might need that, rather than just kind of saying, well, you should journal more. I think journaling is amazing, but in this situation, that may not be what I actually need. So I want you to take a pause, and I want you to work through this coping grid. And I want you to write down as many ideas as you can come up with for the coping strategies that you use. Okay, you've probably come to the point now, if you did pause, that you're recognizing you're out of ideas. And that's okay. Come back to it later, invite somebody else into the conversation. Think about things like, do you talk to friends? Do you listen to music? Do you journal? Do you draw? Do you go on hikes? Do you exercise? Do you watch movies? Do you make movies? All of these things that maybe you don't think about as coping strategies, but really help you regulate your emotional wellness. I also want to point out that we can have a coping strategy with 4 different variations. For example, music is a really good one. I may listen to music when I'm sad to make me more sad. That might be an active negative, depending on how that's impacting me. I could also listen to sad music when I'm feeling sad to help me express that sadness and to have words for it. That would be a really positive, active use of music. I might listen to really happy music when I'm feeling sad because it uplifts me and distracts me, and I can just get into the beats and the melodies and sing along. That's gonna be more passive and positive. I could also maybe just listen to music all the time and never stop listening to music. Always have it on, always be trying to have noise going on in my head. And while that may not necessarily be a negative passive skill, it could be. And so we've got music in all 4, and that's totally fine because we want to know how we can intentionally use these coping skills as well. Now I want you to take a look at your coping grid. Do you notice that you have more passive than active, or maybe more active than passive? What does that mean to you that one has more than the other? Finally, I want you to, in a different color pencil or pen, write in some of the coping strategies that maybe you don't use yet, but you think might be helpful. So this might look like writing in mindfulness activities to help you be more present in the moment or to help you in the midst of anxiety. We've got an activity that'll be up on the collective called 54321 that I think is really beautiful, especially in anxiety, and it just helps you ground yourself. That might be more passive, or you could use mindfulness skills to be more active. I hope that this coping grid concept has been helpful for you, and I do want to encourage you again, invite somebody else into the conversation because they may be able to see things that you can't see right now. And come back to this, add to it, take away from it as you notice different coping strategies that you're engaging in. I also want to encourage you to sit with this and let this be encouraging, not discouraging. It can be discouraging if you found that you only put like two coping strategies on there, or that all of your coping strategies are passive. And that's okay. You have already taken an amazing step towards your own growth and development by recognizing that, by seeing that. Because now you either know, I need more coping strategies, I need to figure out what that means, or I probably need a couple active coping skills so that I can actually work through things that are happening. You may also be on the other side where you only have active skills. And I'm going to tell you, you need to find some passive skills too. We can't sit in active all the time. If you have any more questions about the coping grid, feel free to reach out to Mayfield Counseling Centers. And I want to encourage you to continue exploring the Mayfield Collective and to keep going on your journey of growth and development. You got this.